Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. So here we have an Artful Dodgers Groundfox version 1. In this box we have an Artful Dodgers Groundfox version 2, and in this video I'm going to start taking that one apart and comparing the parts with what's in this box and then start putting this one together. Okay, so as you can probably tell, it's pretty easy to take one of these things apart. Once the axles and the transmission have all been built up in the first place, there's only a few screws holding them in, and so it's quite easy to do maintenance on these chassis, especially if it's an LCG style. I've popped a few bits back onto this so you get an idea of what the Groundfox 1.2 would look like. Remember that all the pieces you see here were supplied by Artful Dodgers. One of the things I particularly liked about Artful Dodgers, and which is still the case, is that they include all of the hardware and all of the extra parts in the box, so all you need is one donor vehicle, in my case an Element Enduro. I've also got one of their optional steel bumpers on the front of this, which I'll be transferring across the new chassis. So what I'll be doing now is I will take one of these side plates off, one of these aluminium chassis plates off from the Groundfox 1.2. You can see here with some of the wear and tear, and I will be comparing that directly to the chassis plate for the new Groundfox 2. Okay, so here are the two chassis rails side by side. This one on the bottom here is the Groundfox 1.2, the aluminium chassis rail, which I've been using, and you might just be able to pick out, especially from the way that it lays on the board here, that it's taken a little bit of a bend, because when you assemble the chassis, you pinch the top of the rails in compared to the skid plate. But that is the original one, the Groundfox 1.2. This one here is the Groundfox version 2 rail, this time in carbon. Obviously hasn't been assembled, so it's completely flat. I would expect actually that if you took it apart after you'd assembled it, it would spring back to shape much more so than the aluminium would, because carbon won't take a bend in that situation. That'll be interesting to see when we're doing some routine maintenance. But the most interesting comparison, of course, is obviously laying them on top of one another to see where the differences lie. So let's do that now. So if we use the level of the bumper mounts, the main rails, as your reference point here, what's quite interesting to me immediately is the relative position of the two skid plates. Now, as you can see on the Groundfox version 2, the skid plate is relatively quite a lot higher. That must be at least 5mm, maybe in the region of 8mm higher up than it is on the Groundfox version 1.2. It'll be interesting to see what impact that has on clearance once it's built up. In terms of the geometry of the skid plate and the mountings for the links, you should be able to see that they do more or less line up the holes here. These are for the rear link, these are the mounting for the upper link, and this is for the front link, the mounting as well. The positions for the skid plate are broadly the same. There's a slightly different drilling here, but I think that the holes that actually mount the skid plate, the Fox belly skid plate, are exactly the same. Realigning again back with the bumper mountings being level and looking at the shock towers, it seems that the mounting positions, this being the rear, gives some positions that are slightly further forward than they are on the previous Groundfox. And that's also the case at the front as well, with the mountings being slightly further forward for the shocks. But the heights of the different mountings do seem to be on the same levels. So more or less you can line them up here between the two chassis at the same height. It's just they're offset a little bit further forward. Looking at the far ends of each one, the version 2 chassis is ever so slightly longer, so we're lined up at the back here, and it's about 5mm longer overhang at the front. But the mounting positions for the the bumper and other accessories and other braces do seem to be more or less the same. Obviously there have been some changes to the electronics plates that mount in this area here, so there will be some differences between the two chassis there. Again, it'll be interesting to see what they're like once you've built the two chassis up. Time to turn this into a chassis instead of a box of bits. So after combining the manual for the Vanquish version of the Groundfox 2 and the pictures on the Artful Dodgers website, I've managed to put together just the chassis for the Groundfox version 2. It's the chassis towards the front in this video, and I thought this was a good opportunity to just compare it with the version 1.2 Groundfox that I already had. So I'll start at the front, and one thing that surprised me actually about this Groundfox version 2 is how much of it is actually completely different, even though superficially it does look a lot like this older version just in terms of the layout. Every single part is basically different. So we did some analysis of the chassis rails earlier, showing the difference in the relative height of the skid and in some of the other holes on the chassis. Another thing that you'll notice straight away at the front is that the version 2 Groundfox is using a different style of body mount. It's on an aluminium plate and it's currently set up with a single screw with a thumb nut on it to hold the body in place, whereas the older Groundfox used some 3D printed mounts and the standard Element Enduro body posts, which I have to say was actually a solution that I quite liked, because I quite like using body posts. But it'll be interesting to see how this new solution using the thumb nut works for holding the body in place. Both trucks have lots and lots of options for mounting the shock absorbers, and I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of experimentation when I put this together with electrics and the axles and the shocks, which is something that I won't do on video. I'll take some time over that over the coming weeks and do another video when the whole truck is finished. Just behind here on the new Groundfox version 2, you can see the aluminium plate for mounting electronics or battery. And this place also is possible to pivot. You can just about see here that there is a slot that bolt goes through, which allows you to change the position of this electronic mounting plate. As I say, made of aluminium, whereas on the Groundfox version 1.2, it's a 3D printed part, which doesn't have any actual angle adjustment on it, although with that one you could cut it away if you wanted it to be smaller to suit your electronics. Looking at the actual motor mount, again, it's a different piece. The anodizing is very similar with the goldy color, but there are some extra slots and holes in the latest version of the motor mount. So once I've assembled it, it'll become clear to me why there are those extra slots in there. It looks like it still has the standard positions. Also a little bit more beefed up on the mounting position here. As you can see, plenty of material around the screws. Whereas with the older version, that one screw in the corner here doesn't actually have very much material around it. It hasn't been a problem for me, but it's nice to see some revisions to make the design more durable. Looking at the rock sliders on the version 2, they are actually slightly longer than on the Groundfox version 1.2. Looks like they've got a slot in them, so potentially if you wanted to, you could cut them down a bit. And moving to the back of the truck, again, very similar to the front, with the new way of mounting the body using a thumb nut and a screw, various options for mounting shocks and for bracing the chassis, and this simpler chassis brace at the rear here, which you probably couldn't get very much on, but is really just intended to hold the two chassis plates the correct distance apart from each other. Again, on the older Groundfox, we were using a 3D printed part at the rear, which in my case I wasn't mounting any electronics on because I had everything towards the front of the truck, and that's the layout I'll try and be copying on the version of the truck here as well, just to get the weight towards the front of the truck. Last thing I want to mention is, of course, that there is some pinch on the chassis for this new carbon fibre version, as there was on the previous aluminium chassis. and you can see that the width of the skid plate here is actually wider than the width of the body mounts and the spacers for holding the chassis plates apart, and that pinch where the area here is narrower compared to here, that does give the chassis some extra strength. So there you go, that's a quick overview of the Groundfox version 2 chassis compared to the version 1.2. This one's going to become an Element Enduro based rig. As ever, if you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below. I do hope that you found this video useful. A like or a subscribe would be very good for me, helps me to keep the channel going. And as ever, thank you very much for watching.